Hi everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. And I hope that you are doing well, and I hope that life is treating you well as well, and that you're getting plenty of things that fill you up with energy and give you energy to do things that you want to do. So today I have chapter 2 of how to write a book. So this I had promised before when I had given you a non-technical overview of writing books. And today I'd like to give you a more technical view of writing books. So firstly, we'll start with what you actually use to write your book. So paper or not paper, what are the advantages of writing by hand or writing using a computer? Nowadays, I think you can also speak and write. I don't know how well that actually translates into the written word, and whether you can definitely get exactly what you're trying to say, but it's something you could play around with. So, paper and pens. Sometimes the feeling of ink on paper sometimes cannot readily be replaced. So this is something you have to think about. And I have written some books by hand and then typed them up, and I've written some books directly onto the computer. So when you write by hand, there is an advantage in that when you come to type it up, you automatically edit it as you're typing it up because you're reading it, and then when you type it up, it already goes into an edited form. The dangers about writing on paper, of course, are if you lose your document. So there's something very delicious about using a notepad and paper. But what I would say to you about that is if you do it, then type it up very soon afterwards. So if you're writing a book by hand, then maybe try and transfer any parts that you've written to the computer as soon as you can. Now, I am being a complete hypocrite telling you this because I currently have a book where I have not had any time to actually transfer the handwritten book onto a computer. So it's quite dangerously sitting in a computer bag awaiting transfer. That's not intentional. It's just my life has changed to the point where I just don't have time to actually put my work onto the computer the way that I had intended when I hand wrote it. So it's something you have to be aware of. Just maybe try and gauge, do you actually have the time to type up your work and after you've handwritten it? So try and maybe do it in chunks. Now, if, for example, you are not going to have the time to type it up, then maybe take pictures of it so that you have at least a saved copy somewhere electronically that you could refer to if, for example, something happens to your written manuscript. So then we come to, maybe I'll say a little bit more actually about handwritten work. So the books that I have handwritten, they are very, very close to my heart. And I don't know if that's because of how they were written or the content of the books, but I do write by hand often, and it's very therapeutic. So there's a lot to be said for carrying a physical notebook, a paper notebook about with you, and also your favorite pen or your favorite pens, because that can be quite therapeutic for you. So let's come to writing directly onto the computer. So if you make your file into one file, this is a very good way of actually keeping a record of all your thoughts that come to you. So what you can do is you can put your title of the book there, format your title in a way that looks good to you. That doesn't mean to say that's going to be the final format of how it looks, but do it in a way that is really friendly to you. Don't worry about what the book is going to look like in terms of format in its finished version. Firstly, you need a book that looks good to you because this is the document you're working with. So choose a font that you love, one that you can read. Sometimes we have fonts that we love that we can use, say, for the title of the book, but we need to choose something a little bit more practical to actually work with. And then you can write that in black. Say, for example, your title doesn't have to be in black. Your title can be very fancy looking. The way you put your name can be very fancy looking. This is for your draft document, the one before you publish it. And then you can write your text in black if that's the color you want to write in. And then you can write your notes at the bottom of the document, and they will stay at the bottom of the document because you can type under your title into the text, and you can space your comments further down so that you don't even have to look at them while you're actively working on the book. But put them in a different color. So you can put them in red. You can even highlight them if you want to, if there are different kinds of comments that relate to different chapters, different parts of the book. So you might start writing your book and you've got 50 ideas about what need to go in the book. So capture them all in a comment section that's below the body of your book. And then revisit the comment section as you're writing the book. So be aware of what's in there. And when you cover it, so say you've written a comment that needs to be included in a particular chapter or particular part of the story, after you have covered it, either change the color of the comment or write done next to it, or take it out altogether if you've already covered it. But make sure that you do that, because if you're writing, say, for example, an 80,000 word book, it's going to be tough proofreading it. And even during proofreading, if you come across the same thing twice, you might not even realize that you've written it twice. So we want to catch all of that kind of thing during the writing of the book to ensure that you don't cover the same material twice. So then we have saving your work. So I've already talked about the paper copies and about taking photos if you don't have time to type it up. But the typed up versions, how do we save them? I tend to use, so I will save it onto my computer, and I know that you'll all be very tech savvy and will have ways of saving your work. One of the things that I do is I have in my email system, I have folders for each of my books, and every time I work on a document, I then send it to myself and I put it into the folder. So if anything else were to happen, God forbid anything happened to my computer or whatever, I still have a copy on my email of the latest versions of my book. You can delete previous versions, if you're trying to save some email storage, but it's good to have some of your previous versions because sometimes you want to refer back, like you look at your work and you think, did I actually write this? Was this the original concept, or was this the actual wording that I wrote? So it can be very useful as well to have some previous versions, but you don't have to keep them all. I find that's a handy way. Sometimes what happens is I'll look at my file on the computer and it has maybe 30 versions of the same book on there. As I've been writing it, I've been saving it. Each day that I write it, I change the date and I save it. It's not that easy if I've had a 6-month break from writing that particular book. It's not that easy to look at the folder on my computer and figure out what was the latest version, what's the one I'm supposed to pick up from. But then if I go to my email folder and I actually go to that folder, the very latest version on there will be the one that I was working on. So I can get the date and pick it up from there as well. So that's one way, but I'm sure you'll have many other ways that you can think of, but it's something you need to think of, and you need to make sure that every time you do a piece of work, that it is saved somewhere, that it is not going to get destroyed. So this is me giving you advice that I haven't even done myself. I have a whole book that is handwritten, that I don't have pictures of or anything. I'm just living in hope that somehow I will get time to type it up. So let's hope that happens. Partly because I think you would love that book. And so, yeah, here's wishing for the time that book will be in an electronic version. So chapters. Now, when you do your first chapter run, and by that I mean when you get an idea of your book, you may think, I'm going to have these 10 chapters, these 25 chapters, however many chapters, and you have an idea of what these chapters are going to be called. So that's fine. Make that list in your comment section at the bottom of your book. And the reason I say that is you can pick your chapters up from that comment section. But during writing your book, those chapter headings are very, very useful. However, they may or may not be your final chapter headings. So refer to them as your book goes along, refer to them and see if those are the chapter headings that you want. This is because books have a way of wanting to write themselves. So we put a lot of effort into writing when we're writing a book, but the book itself has its own say. So once the book is underway, it's almost like the book itself will take over. So it might become something that's unexpected to you. And in the course of that, your chapter headings might also need to be ones that you didn't expect. And that's absolutely okay. So if your book turns out to be different to what you originally thought it was going to be, then that's 100% okay. It's like with art. Should we force art? Should we start with the concept and then make sure that, that's the end result? I would say, from my experience with writing, we start with the will to write. We start with the inspiration. However, that seed, when you plant that seed, it could grow into something that is different to what you imagined, and that is absolutely okay and can also be very exciting. So allow the seed of your inspiration to become the tree that it wants to become and to bear the fruit that it wishes to bear. So your title, where do we get the title from? I would say go with something that feels right to you. So we live in a world full of lots of different media, and we also live in a world where a lot of people are, for many reasons, people want to put their content out there. So I haven't felt, thankfully, I haven't felt at any point that I need to do anything in a certain way to put content out there or to write things in a certain way. And I would recommend to you that you also stick to that, because your work is unique. Only you can do the work that you do. Only you can write the books that you write. Nobody else can do that. Even if you have a twin sibling who is an identical twin, I'm pretty sure that if you both wrote a book, then you're probably not going to end up with the same thing. So that makes every person special, and that makes every person's message extremely special and extremely unique. So any temptation you might have, and people can have these temptations for different reasons. So there's a lot of pressure in the world. There always is. From the time that we're born, there's a lot of pressure for peer pressure. There's pressure due to social conduct and things like that. But to create something that is beautiful and new and unexpected and to touch people's hearts, we have to come from in here, from our hearts. And so your title as well, your title might be surprising for a book. It might not be something that you would think of as being regular for a book. Now, if you think of a title that feels right, that looks regular for a book, then great, wonderful. You can put that title on your book. If you think of a title that doesn't fit that bill, then that is okay too, because it's still going to be the correct title for your book. And that is important, because everything that you do here has to feel right for you. Because if it doesn't feel right for you, there can become an emptiness about that piece of work. So what I would strongly advise against is thinking of, say, for example, you're going to have readers, but you don't want to ever start with or ever fall prey to thinking, what might be in demand? What might readers want to read? You want to touch them from the light that's within you. And you cannot get that light from outside of you. It has to feel right to you. So I would say about the title, your chapter headings, the content of your book, they have to feel right to you. And then also, what you have to bear in mind is that writing a book is an incredibly exhausting process. So that's fine if you have the time and energy to expend on a large project, then that's fine. You just have to make sure that you look after yourself. There are times that I've done such long shifts of writing that I probably haven't done enough self-care. It's really difficult to advise on that, but it's an important thing for you to consider, because when we get carried away writing books, we really can get carried away. And self-care is extremely important, because how can you produce work if you don't have the energy in you? This is easier said than done, because most of us probably have jobs and other commitments and priorities that are that call on our time, that already exhaust us. But we need to bear in mind that if we set out on the journey of writing, that this is not going to be a journey that you're not going to need energy for. Let me phrase it better. This is going to be a journey that you need energy for. You're going to need energy to write the book. You're going to need energy to suffer for the book. And what I mean by that is, if you have characters, you're going to feel for those characters. And that's something we need to be prepared for. I wasn't prepared for it, because I actually never intended to write a book. The writing happened. I most certainly was not prepared for what I felt for the characters and how much I suffered for when the characters were going through things. And even now when I read my books, I'm still not prepared for it. I still suffer for the characters. So that can take a lot of energy out of you. The other thing is, when you come to proofreading, editing your book, so you write your first draft. When you come to looking at it again, you might see things that you think, I want to change them, but I don't know if it's right to change them, because what about the original essence of my book? Should I change it, or should I stick with the wording that I had? You can imagine that these kind of dilemmas do not come inexpensively to one's being. These kind of dilemmas, they cost a lot in terms of energy. So those are things that we have to be knowledgeable about before we set out to them. Like, we don't have to be knowledgeable about them before we set out for them, but it's really good to know, because when it hits you, if you're not prepared for it, and you might have no one else around you who writes, so you can't explain it to anybody, it's kind of good to know ahead of time that you can come up against this stuff. And if you come up against it, again, we have to think about self-care. In fact, in any situation in life, I know that we may not always have the option to even look at self-care. But somewhere in our minds, it is good to have the thought of it in there, because then the likelihood of us, rather than ourselves burning ourselves out writing books, that in amongst there we think, actually, I need to meet up with a good friend and have a cup of coffee and have a good chat with them about life. I know I have a book to write. I know I have a deadline. I know I have, 100 other things to do, a job to attend to. When am I going to write my book? When am I going to proofread my book if I don't do it now? But I feel so tired and I feel so exhausted. It is really at those times that we have to think, we don't want to burn ourselves out. So be prepared for how intensive writing a book can be, and how much energy it can take from you. There's another unexpected aspect to books that I found. When I wrote my first book, I didn't know the book was coming. I also didn't know it was going to end when it ended. The emotional impact of that is something that I find very hard to revisit even today. That happened a very, very long time ago, but I'm so kind of affected by it that even thinking back, I'm not thinking about it just now, I'm telling you about it, but I'm not taking myself back to that point in time, because I did not know the book was going to end that day. And the book ended in such a place that it needed a sequel. I'd not intended to write the book. I'd most definitely not intended to write a book that then would need a sequel, that would end up being published when the sequel wasn't ready, and putting other people in a position where they would be asking the question, please, where is the sequel? All of that, the kind of energy and the kind of emotions you go through are huge. So it's good to be aware beforehand that what you're letting yourself in for can be something that you didn't expect. So I'm hoping that if you're hearing this now and watching this video, that you will have a better idea than I did of what to expect. Everybody's journey is different, but it's also good to have a heads up from someone who's been there. And then what else would I like to tell you? Do not be frightened to strike stuff out of your book. So if you come back to reading it and you think, and this has happened once in my life, I had put a lot of effort into writing one chapter. And when I reread that chapter, the book itself didn't want the chapter, as in the chapter didn't align with the book. So my books are written from the heart. That chapter I had designed in my mind and written it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's just the books that I write, it doesn't work for. And so I had spent such a very long time writing this chapter. And honestly, to remove it from the book, it really hurt because of the time I'd spent. But it didn't work with the book. And when this sort of thing happens, don't worry about it. You don't have to bin your chapter. You can take it out of the book. What I usually do, I put those types of those parts of the book, if I'm going to exclude them, I change the font to a different color, and I move it to a different part of I move it to the end of the book, because that way you're not destroying your work. You're just putting it somewhere. If you ever need it again, you will know where it is. but it's maybe not going to make it into that book, and that's okay. And the feelings that you have about that are okay too, because your feelings might be that you feel sad. Don't tell yourself how to feel. Just allow yourself to process the emotions, because writing a book can be such a very emotional game. And so if you are feeling sad about having had to do that, allow yourself to feel the sadness, look after yourself. Always, always, we should try to do that. But give yourself a break if that kind of thing happens, because you might feel some mourning, you might feel that it hits you harder than you might have thought. You might not have expected that you would have to do this. So give yourself a break if that happens, and allow yourself the time to accept that it happens. And then formatting. So if you have a publisher, they will format your book, so you don't have to worry about that. Write it as you do. Obviously, write it in a way that would make sense to both you and anyone else that's going to read it. So if you're intending to have readers, if you're writing a book for yourself, that's fine. You don't have to think much further about it. But if you're intending to have readers, your book needs to make sense to the readers. They have to have a chance of being able to interpret it in a way that you intended. So give them the best chance of that. That I believe is also advice that was given by my favourite author. I need to check and see whether that advice was given by my favourite author. And in terms of your cover, so I was once offered a cover for my book that, looking at it and looking at where I live in the world, that cover probably would have instantly made people pick the book up, and it would have appealed. This was my feeling when I first saw the cover. The cover did not represent my book. So then I didn't have a dilemma, but in case, say you are working with an illustrator or a publisher, and they come up with a very good cover that would sell a book. I put that in inverted commas because I quite frankly don't know how to gauge what would or wouldn't sell a book. But that cover didn't represent my book. So I felt very, very upset about it, because the cover itself was very good. So it's very hard to turn down a cover that is very good and very appealing. I mean, it was appealing to me, but it wasn't right for my book. And so the cover that I then requested may or may not be as appealing as the initial cover that I was given, but the cover is correct for the book. So for me, I felt I had to be true to the book, because I felt if I'm not true to my own book, who is going to be? And if I'm not true to it, then how are the readers going to know whether or not this is a book that they want to read? So I also didn't want to put anybody in a position where they buy the book thinking it's something, and then it's not the book that they thought it was. So these are, these are recommendations that I'm giving you. So I would say overall, go easy on yourself. You're unique, so your book is going to be unique. If you're writing a book, you're going to need energy, so make sure to look after yourself always. Be prepared. Be prepared for the journey it's going to be. That journey can be exciting. That journey can involve a lot of work. That journey can make you wish you had never ever written a book. That is something that I felt a lot because of the amount of work, but also for many other reasons. And if that happens, if you get to that point, give yourself a break and try and do something different that makes you feel different for a bit until you can handle the feelings that your writing has ended up causing you. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have written a book. It just means that writing books can be extremely, extremely tough. And I think that's the main message that I actually want to give you today is be prepared for the journey. So I currently live in a state where it's very hard for me, having written books on the stage that I'm at. And I'm wishing for the day when I can look back and not be sitting in the toughest times of having written books. I would still not say to someone, don't write one. I would just say, be prepared and be good to yourself. And also be prepared for the fact that there might be no one else around you who understands you. So, for that, again, we have to tell ourselves we are unique. We are unique, and therefore the only people who really understand us probably ourselves. And that's fine, because you can spend time understanding yourself because you deserve that. And I'm sure your books will be amazing. So I look forward to reading them. And if you're setting out to write a book, then best of luck with it. I'll be coming back with more recommendations and things. I'm also on a journey. So I do have books that are published. I have 3 books that are published. I have more books that will be published. My 3 books are The Book of Stamps, The Luminosity of Energy, The Luminosity of Crystals and Dimensions of the Heart. They're all by Vidya. That is my name. So I'm going to wish you a lovely evening or morning or a nighttime, whatever time of day it is where you are, and always wishing you good things, always wishing for love in your heart, light in your heart. And so take care, and I will see you again soon. Bye.